Welcome back to the continuing adventures of the monad. We have just completed 8 presentations that endeavor to explain the relationship between a monad and its solar deva. That relationship is grounded in a physical interaction, which initially exists unconsciously, but is then activated by the building of the famous Rainbow Bridge. But what exactly is the Rainbow Bridge? That is going to be the topic of this series of presentations, which have been synthesized from an essay penned by Lars Edelkeshog titled The Science of the Antahkarana. We will start by restating that the whole point of evolving through the 4th kingdom of nature is to reach the 5th kingdom. To achieve this, humanity has to go through a series of initiatory milestones. This process, for us humans, is twofold. It is easy to associate this dual nature with the disciple trying to live a life on the first triad, a practical life of service, you could call it. This is juxtaposed with a subjective spiritual life that exists on the second triad, currently focused in the causal envelope. This envelope is at the present time ruled over by the solar devas that we spent so much time discussing. For this series of presentations, let's revert to calling this causal envelope the soul. We know this is not quite us at the moment, but let's think of it as though it is. If the dual life of the initiatory process is not either of these two things, then what is it? It is a preparation of the disciple to take the I3. This dual life is about developing one's mental life and refining one's attitude to the world around you. But does what has just been said mean that the initiatory process is about the duality of a disciple's mental life only? What about the relationship between the soul and the persona? Just to be clear, the soul refers here to the higher causal body and the persona or personality to a fragment of this causal body that separates and encapsulates the 3 envelopes of the first triad. These, as you should be well aware of by now, are the mental, emotional, and etheric envelopes. The physical organism is not a principal envelope, constructed on behalf of the monad, but an organic reality suit loaned to the monad for it to experience life on the lowest physical plane of matter, 49.5-7. So, what are the 2 manifestations of the consciousness aspect of the disciple that are linked to the initiatory process? The first is a gathering awareness of the soul's expression, awareness, and consciousness through the persona on the physical plane. This first has to be registered by the persona and then expressed correctly. The second aspect is subjective and private to the disciple, which can now be thought of as a soul-infused personality. The disciple is trying to link its lower concrete mind with the higher abstract mind. Remember, what is termed the causal body is part of a collective envelope 47. That is a mental functioning envelope. One that has a concrete and abstract component to it that exists on 2 triads simultaneously. The second is a subjective rapport that the disciple is trying to generate between themselves and the master of their ray group. This is often termed ashramic consciousness. The final link being created is between the disciple and the hierarchy as a whole. At the center of this hierarchy dwells the world teacher, Christ Maitreya. This brings us to the topic of this series of presentations. To initiate, the disciple must first construct that bridge which is known as the Antahkarana. This bridge links the second triad to the first. The mental body is the anchor point, and so it has to be synchronized with its more refined sibling on the second triad. The mental envelope resides at one end of our representation of the first triad. For us to become aware of what may or may not be happening in our mental envelopes, our physical etheric brain has to be objectively linked to our lower mental envelope. In this manner, the second triad comes into direct communication with our brain, linking the higher and lower minds. The facilitator of all this is the Antahkarana. Easy, right? Only if it were. A great deal of work must be done to increase our interpretive abilities and our power to visualize our objectives. Lars clarifies that the term visualization should not just concern itself with form and mental presentations. Remember, these ideas are coming from the causal world. Therefore, we are dealing with geometric representations of knowledge, not linear thought processes. To grasp this knowledge, our intuition 47.3 has awakened. Difficult though this process of constructing the Antahkarana is, through a process of visualization, the disciple becomes more responsive to ideas emanating from its ashram. It also has a greater awareness of the divine plan as it exists in our current reality. Awareness also increases the secret esoteric knowledge that is revealed at each successive initiation. Slowly, the disciple comes to realize the value, use, and purpose of creative imagination. Let us just pause here and think about what creative imagination is and where it resides. When you imagine something, you are creating an elemental. Where? In your emotional envelope. We have all had innumerable incarnations where we have activated elemental essences with our powerful imaginations. This is why trusting everything a clairvoyant says is unwise. They can only see into this world of illusions and fantasies. If the Galactic High Command of Alpha Centauri is communicating with you, because you are so special that they would go to all the trouble to set up a link, this is where that high command dwells, in the emotional world. It is either the collective imaginations of powerful fantasists or the machinations of the Black Lodge. Take your pick. Neither option is appealing. However, all is not lost. We do eventually come to our senses, and when we do, all that is bequeathed to us from this emotional world is our creative imagination. So you see, it does serve a purpose. It serves as a mechanism for transformation. Desires are transformed into aspirations, and this leads to the development of intuition. It prepares us for the next stage of our journey. How? Because inherent in desire is the imaginative quality of the soul. This is slowly developed as the monad focuses its conscious gaze on sublevels of the emotional envelope. This leads to higher and higher realizations. How is this developed further? It happens because eventually the mental envelope is invoked, and it brings common sense to the party. You now have a directed thought backed by tremendous creative energy. It is in this manner that the first and second triads are united. Do not disregard your emotional envelope. It is the key to passing the I3. Counterintuitive as that may at first seem. Let us qualify the foregoing with a bit of esoteric history. We are told that the emotional world, as we know and love it, was not supposed to exist as part of the divine plan. We created it with our wild fantasies and glamorous imaginings. Esoteric literature refers to this world as Kama Manas. Kama is the emotional aspect and Manas means mind. Another way of describing it is a total mess. We as humanity created it all by ourselves since the early days of the fourth root race, otherwise known as Atlantis. But don't despair too much. As our Antahkarana begins to develop, we will slowly clear away the mists of glamour. What we are left with will be a powerful tool of creative imagination. This can then be wielded by the disciple to make contact with World 46 and higher. This is not done just so that the disciples can have a chat with the masters. It is done to bring into symbolic form that which is revealed to them to serve the purposes of evolution. What makes this all possible? It is the development of a current of energy that is known as the Antahkarana. This current, the disciple steadily and scientifically creates. We tend to see the building of the rainbow bridge being an event that just starts when a monad focuses its consciousness in the 47-4 permanent molecule. In reality, this structure is developed at the I1 and I2, and the soundness of this connection is tested at each stage. We cannot build this structure by ourselves. It is ultimately guided by our connection to and inspiration from the three aspects of our triad. We have to have an abstract mind that links to the third triad, a soul also known as the son of mind, and our lower concrete mind on the first triad. This has all to be done with the cooperation of our soul-infused persona. After all, we have to consciously sign up for this process. In the earlier stages of a disciple's journey, the work of invocation is done through the creative imagination. This has been discussed before, where you can imagine you are where you want to be, as if you are already there. This slowly morphs into you actually getting there. So, things are no longer a working hypothesis, but an observable fact. In the next presentation, we will begin to discuss the building of the Antahkarana. Thank you.